The other night, I was having dinner with an old colleague, someone who prides himself on being awake to the world's harsh realities.
Oh, we all know someone exactly like that.
Right. And for nearly an hour, he was on fire, leaning across the table and railing against the blindness of the general public. Mm-hmm. His voice had this sharp, rhythmic intensity as he spoke about global corruption and systemic failures.
Yeah.
He looked energized, almost heroic, as he lamented how most people simply can't handle the truth.
Playing the enlightened savior, basically?
Exactly. He kept using words like transparency and accountability as if they were holy relics he was personally guarding.
Wow.
But then the conversation shifted. I mentioned a specific documented instance of ethical compromise involving a local organization he had championed for years.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, a group that was central to his own social identity and professional respectability. And the change wasn't gradual.
It never is it?
No, it was like watching a shutter slam shut in an old house.
Yeah.
His posture, which had been open and aggressive, suddenly became rigid. The fire in his eyes died out, replaced by a cold, defensive squint. He didn't ask for the evidence I had.
Well, of course not.
He didn't want to see the dates or the names. Instead, he started performing a series of frantic mental gymnastics, talking about context, necessary evils, and strategic nuances.
Classic.
Within 5 minutes, the man who had been demanding the truth at the top of his lungs was now busily stitching together a shroud to bury it.
That is just such a perfect image for what happens.
Watching him, I realized that his earlier passion for the truth was actually just a passion for a specific kind of story.
Right, a very convenient story.
One where he was the enlightened observer and the villains were far away. The moment the truth stopped being a headline and started being an acid that might dissolve his own self-image, he fled.
He absolutely panicked.
It made me wonder, what if our problem isn't that we are too weak to hear the truth, but that we are too terrified of the person we would have to become if we actually believed it? What if the truth doesn't just inform us, but demands a metamorphosis we aren't willing to pay for? Why do we applaud the truths that cost us nothing, yet treat the ones that demand a change in our own lives like a surgical strike on our very existence?
You know, that dinner encounter, it perfectly illustrates a massive misunderstanding we have about what truth actually is, like in the human ecosystem.
So?
Well, the overarching assumption in modern discourse is that truth is this neutral entity. We treat it as a static collection of data points. Right?
Like a math equation or something.
Exactly. A quantifiable metric that's just waiting to be uncovered, verified, and seamlessly integrated into whatever worldview we already have.
Right.
And the expectation is always that humans operate as these perfectly rational processors of data. But the reality is that specific types of truth, they don't function as data at all.
They function as an acid.
Yes. They act as a highly corrosive agent. This acid threatens to just eat right through our carefully constructed individual identities, our institutional frameworks, and, our deeply entrenched social agreements.
So today's deep dive is really about mapping out the exact mechanisms that deploy when this acid is introduced to the system.
That's the mission.
We're going to examine reality across 3 specific escalating scales. We've got the psychological, the institutional, and the social. And the goal here is to understand the desperate, elaborate, and frankly, highly sophisticated defensive architecture that we use to neutralize this disruptive force.
And the individual level, the psychological scale, that provides the foundational blueprint for all of this neutralization.
Right, because the prevailing narrative right now is always that society is fracturing because individuals just, reject facts.
Which is so reductive.
Because when you look closely at the mechanics of identity preservation, you realize that truth is rejected because it acts as a solvent on the ego itself.
Let's talk about Elias, because his story isolates this exact chemical reaction perfectly.
Oh, Elias, yes. Imagine Elias, a really celebrated journalist. He's sitting in his home studio late at night.
Right.
And the physical environment is highly specific to his identity. You have this cold, sterile blue light from his dual monitors.
Just casting that glow across the room.
Exactly. And it's reflecting sharply off the glass of this framed Journalist of the Year award that's hanging prominently on the wall right behind him.
The ultimate symbol of his ego.
And he is 3 hours deep into the meticulous editing of a career-defining retrospective piece. The subject is a local housing protest that escalated into severe violence. And this specific narrative, like blaming the violence entirely on the city's systemic aggression. That was the catalyst for his entire professional ascent.
It made his career.
It was the story that cemented his reputation as this fearless truth teller, a real community hero.
Right.
But then, right in the middle of this process, an email arrives in his inbox.
The acid drops.
The acid drops. It's a communication from his primary, most heavily relied upon source. And this email contains a time-stamped, incontrovertible confession.
Wow.
The source explicitly admits to intentionally provoking and escalating the violence that Elias had publicly and very famously attributing to the municipality.
Just devastating to his entire premise.
Completely. And the physical sensation of this information processing in his brain, it's immediate and it's violent. The atmosphere in the room seems to change density, turning like thin and metallic. He gets this hot, prickling sensation of shame and existential panic spreading across the back of his neck, manifesting almost like a physical rash.
Because the stakes are instantly clear to him.
Clear. Acknowledging this email does not simply mean issuing a standard journalistic retraction.
No, it's way bigger than that.
It means the complete dissolution of his status as a righteous advocate.
Right.
It means handing a massive, unearned ideological victory to a political faction that he absolutely despises.
Which is unthinkable for him.
Unthinkable. It means looking at that award on his wall and recognizing it as a monument to a falsehood.
Ew. He doesn't delete it immediately, does he?
No, he doesn't. He just sits there paralyzed in the blue light. He stares at the cursor hovering right over the trash icon until his vision literally blurs from the strain.
God, the tension.
But by morning, the file is entirely gone from his system.
Gone.
He has constructed this mental architecture to justify the action, concluding that he is, quote, protecting the broader movement.
Right, the noble lie.
But the reality is that he is protecting the only version of himself he has the psychological capacity to endure.
And the velocity of his rationalization is the critical component to analyze here.
It happens so fast.
Right. The transition from objective journalist to active suppressor of evidence is not this slow, agonizing moral drift.
No.
It is an immediate, violent defensive pivot. This scenario perfectly maps the mechanics of what we call motivated reasoning. Sure. It specifically highlights the profound divergence between operating under an accuracy goal and operating under a directional goal.
Okay, to really understand that divergence, I think it helps to look at the standard analogy we always use for human cognition, which is the mind as a judge.
Right.
The assumption is that the brain sits on the bench, neutrally weighing incoming facts on a scale to arrive at a fair, objective verdict.
Like justice is blind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the mechanics of Elias's reaction demonstrate that the mind operates much more like a highly compensated defense attorney.
Yes.
Its primary unshakable client is the ego, and the mind will exploit any procedural loophole, suppress any damning evidentiary material, and construct any narrative necessary to ensure that its client avoids conviction.
I love that defense attorney analogy because it really captures the adversarial nature of the process, but it does require a little refinement.
So,
Well, a defense attorney is consciously aware that their client might be guilty.
true, they know they're spinning things.
Exactly. They know they're manipulating the system. The human mind, however, does not possess that conscious awareness of its own manipulation.
It thinks it's being objective.
It genuinely believes it is acting as the judge. See, when an individual is genuinely motivated by an accuracy goal, like, for instance, when making a decision where the practical stakes of being wrong are physically dangerous, or when they know they're going to be held strictly accountable by impartial peers.
Right, then you really want to be right.
Exactly. When that happens, they expend massive cognitive energy. They delay the psychological process known as epistemic freezing.
Epistemic freezing.
Yeah.
That's the moment the brain locks onto a conclusion and just stops searching for new data.
Good. Under an accuracy goal, the brain holds the door open. It actually tolerates the discomfort of uncertainty to thoroughly evaluate complex alternatives.
But the introduction of that email instantly terminates any accuracy goal Elias might have held.
Utterly terminates it. The accuracy goal is immediately replaced by a directional goal.
And a directional goal is what exactly?
It's characterized by an absolute desperate need to arrive at a highly specific, predetermined conclusion. For Elias, the predetermined conclusion is not about the facts of the housing protest.
Oh.
The conclusion is simply, I am an ethical journalist, my career is entirely valid, and I am on the correct side of the moral spectrum.
So the mechanics of how the brain achieves this without triggering conscious guilt are super complex. Because Elias doesn't actively draft a plan to become a fraud.
Right.
He doesn't say to himself, I am choosing to lie today.
No, because if he consciously acknowledged he was lying, the ego would still be damaged.
Right? He'd feel like a bad person.
Exactly. Therefore, the brain has to perform this really sophisticated cognitive maneuver to maintain what is termed the illusion of objectivity.
The illusion of objectivity.
Yeah, to arrive at the desired conclusion while maintaining the belief that he's a rational, objective observer, the brain initiates a heavily biased memory search.
So the brain basically functions as a compromised search engine algorithm. It's entirely rigged to only return results that are favorable to the client's defense.
That is the precise mechanism. The brain scans its archives and selectively retrieves only the facts, the historical grievances against the city, the ideological theories, and the past injustices that can logically support the decision to ignore the confession.
Wow.
And it completely suppresses the retrieval of any counter-evidence. Elias then creatively synthesizes the selectively retrieved knowledge to construct a brand new, highly resilient belief.
Which is the concept that protecting the integrity of the movement supersedes the granular facts of this single isolated incident.
And because he has successfully accessed internal data that supports this new stance, he feels completely justified.
He feels logical.
He experiences the subjective sensation of having reasoned his way to a logical conclusion, but the objectivity is entirely illusory.
Because he's structurally blind to the fact that the parameters of the search were dictated by the emotional need to survive the ego threat.
Exactly.
You know, the physiological reaction he experiences.
And the rash.
Yeah, the hot rash on the back of the neck, that metallic taste in the air. It indicates that this is far more than just a cerebral exercise.
It's incredibly physical.
The concept of cognitive dissonance is frequently diluted in public discourse to describe just the mild discomfort of holding two conflicting opinions.
Like, oh, I like eating meat, but I feel bad for cows.
Exactly. But in the context of an acidic truth, dissonance is a severe, acute physiological crisis.
It is a systemic alarm. I mean, the original formulation of cognitive dissonance theory by Leon Festinger in the 1950s suggested that humans simply have a drive for internal consistency.
Right.
However, subsequent decades of psychological modeling, particularly the self-justification revisions by Elliot Aronson, they refined this understanding drastically.
Okay, so
They found that severe dissonance is not triggered by mere logical inconsistency. It is triggered exclusively when there is a direct catastrophic threat to the self-concept.
So the cognition that Elias has just encountered, that his award-winning, identity-defining career is anchored to a manipulated falsehood.
Yeah.
That is completely incompatible with his self-image as an intelligent, rigorous, and highly ethical person.
Completely, the collision of those two cognitions.
Which are, I am a hero of the truth, and I'm a fraud who enabled violence.
Right. The collision of those two creates an unbearable psychological friction.
And that friction produces measurable physiological arousal.
As the autonomic nervous system activates, heart rate increases, skin conductance changes.
Wow.
This physical arousal serves as a glaring, unavoidable biological cue. It signals that a foundational pillar of the ego is under imminent threat of collapse.
It's literally a survival response.
Exactly. The psychological tension is so excruciating that the organism demands immediate eradication of the conflict. The mind cannot sit with it. It cannot integrate it.
So to extinguish that physiological fire, the mind has to alter one of the cognitions.
Right.
And since the self-concept, the I'm a good person part, is too foundational to alter without triggering a total psychological collapse.
The precipitating evidence, the email, must be destroyed.
It's the only way out.
The physical arousal is the exact trigger that launches the motivated reasoning process to neutralize the acid.
Which really explains the futility of simply providing more data to people in these situations.
Absolutely futile.
Like, if a colleague were in the room with Elias and pointed out the irrefutable metadata of the email, or provided a second corroborating confession from another source, it wouldn't override his directional goal. It would trigger the backfire effect.
Yeah, providing more evidence in the midst of a severe ego threat is equivalent to pouring gasoline on a fire.
Right.
The assumption of the rational actor model is that an overwhelming volume of factual evidence will eventually crush a directional goal.
We always think that. Just show them the facts.
Right. But when core beliefs intrinsically tied to identity are challenged, incoming factual evidence is no longer processed as data. It is processed neurologically as an attack.
So to defend against this heightened attack, the individual digs deeper into their cognitive trenches.
They have to. They deploy even more extreme forms of motivated reasoning. They construct increasingly elaborate and, frankly, paranoid defenses to protect the illusion.
They actually become significantly more rigid and far more committed to the delusion than they were before the new evidence was introduced.
Because accepting the email requires a metamorphosis that Elias refuses to undergo.
Right. To integrate the truth, the specific identity he has built, the celebrated journalist, must effectively die.
And the cost of the truth is the total dissolution of his social standing, his professional reality, and his internal self-worth.
It's too high a price. The human psyche is fundamentally organized to prioritize the survival of the ego over the accurate perception of objective reality.
When objective reality threatens the ego's survival, reality is relentlessly discarded. Period.
Okay, so the psychological scale really demonstrates how the individual ego repels the acid of truth. But this defensive architecture is not limited to individual neurology.
No, it scales up.
It scales up to complex, multi-layered entities. The transition from the individual to the institution reveals that entities entirely lacking a human ego still deploy the exact same defensive reflexes when confronted with a transformative reality.
Fascinating.
Let's look at the story of Sarah. She's a junior analyst at a major renewable energy firm, and her experience maps this institutional resistance perfectly. The physical setting is crucial to understanding the power dynamics here. The scene takes place in a high-ceilinged, heavily soundproofed corporate conference room.
Oh, you know the exact type of room.
Yeah. It is an environment designed to convey authority and isolation. It's characterized by the low, expensive hum of a state-of-the-art HVAC system and the presence of sleek, minimalist furniture.
Very sterile, very controlled.
Extremely. So Sarah stands at the head of a long table, presenting a critical bottleneck report.
Right.
And the data displayed on the massive screen behind her is stark. It's extensively documented and undeniably clear.
And what's it about?
It details the sourcing of rare earth minerals. Specifically, the lithium and cobalt required to manufacture the firm's highly publicized flagship clean batteries.
The green energy narrative.
And the data proves conclusively that these minerals are being extracted from a region suffering absolute catastrophic environmental and human devastation.
Wow.
The conditions documented in her report indicate levels of toxicity and exploitation that make legacy coal mining operations appear pristine by comparison.
It's a massive crisis for the firm.
Sarah's focus is on her boss, a high-ranking executive. This is a guy whose entire professional trajectory, political influence, and carefully curated public persona are built entirely on championing what the firm calls the great transition to ethical green energy.
His whole identity is tied up in it, just like Elias.
Exactly. So he sits motionless, absorbing the presentation. He does not contest the statistical models. He does not deny the authenticity of the photographic evidence. His demeanor remains entirely composed. His voice is smooth and untroubled. And instead of addressing the ethical catastrophe, he executes a flawless redirection of reality.
What does he say?
He simply states, we need to outsource the audit of this specific supply chain to a third-party consultancy. Let them handle the complexity of the local reporting.
Oh, that's so sinister.
Upon hearing this, Sarah experiences a profound hollow ache in her chest.
Yeah.
It is the physical manifestation of absolute powerlessness. She is witnessing the precise moment the institutional machine recalibrates to neutralize a threat.
Right.
And it's an understanding she quietly internalizes while taking a sip of lukewarm artisanal coffee. This is the classic institutional maneuver, the deliberate outsourcing of an unbearable truth.
Yeah.
By allocating capital to a third party to manage the data, the executive ensures that he and his colleagues can seamlessly transition to their Friday afternoon values and vision mixers.
Nothing fundamentally changes.
Right. The acid of the strip-mined landscapes is contained, preventing it from burning through the firm's lucrative corporate narrative.
You know, this scenario reveals a really fascinating paradox in the architecture of denial. Well, we just established how Elias utilized motivated reasoning to protect a fragile human ego, right?
Yes.
But an institution, whether it is a multinational corporation, a prominent university, or a government agency, it's a massive distributed network.
Right. It's just a bunch of people and policies.
Exactly. It does not possess a central nervous system. It does not have a personal self-concept, a soul, or a fragile ego to protect.
It's an abstract entity.
Yet, When an institution is confronted with a transformative truth that threatens its operational equilibrium, it reacts with an identical, highly coordinated defensive reflex.
The mechanics of this response really become clear when you view the institution not as a collection of people, but as a vast biological immune system. The disruptive truth, like Sarah's undeniable data regarding the devastated extraction zones, acts as an invading pathogen. It is a virus that threatens to disrupt the host's ability to function, generate profit, and maintain its public mandate.
And the executives maneuver to hire a third-party consultancy. That is not an act of ignoring the virus.
No, ignoring it would be dangerous.
Exactly. Ignoring it would allow it to replicate and spread throughout the company, eventually causing a public relations sepsis.
Right.
Instead, his action is an immunological response aimed at encapsulating the threat.
He's constructing a bureaucratic cyst around the pathogen.
A bureaucratic cyst, yes. The consultancy operates exactly as that cyst, trapping the disruptive data within a contained, controlled environment.
So the host body can then continue its daily operations without suffering a systemic shock.
Exactly. The cyst analogy accurately maps the sociological phenomenon classified as institutional gaslighting.
Institutional gaslighting.
Yeah, when an entity is presented with incontrovertible data that necessitates massive, costly structural change, like data that exposes deep systemic inequalities or ethical violations or environmental devastation.
It rarely responds with outright denial.
Almost never. Outright denial is a massive public relations vulnerability. It looks terrible. Instead, the institution paradoxically embraces the lexicon of transparency and accountability while simultaneously deploying sophisticated strategies to neutralize the threat.
We take these allegations very seriously, right?
The primary objective is to maintain the polished veneer of the corporate image while absolutely avoiding the painful metamorphosis the data demands.
So the execution of this immune response relies on 4 specific, highly observable mechanisms of institutional gaslighting.
The first and honestly most pervasive mechanism is defined as the slowdown.
The slowdown.
The slowdown is the bureaucratic equivalent of quicksand. When disruptive data emerges, the institutional leadership does not explicitly reject the findings. Such a rejection would validate the truth-teller's grievance.
They can't do that.
Instead, they agree that the issue is, quote, vitally important and immediately bury it in endless procedural delays.
They initiate comprehensive environmental scans that take years to complete.
Yes.
They demand prolonged, multi-phase public consultations. They mandate exhaustive reviews of all existing policies by newly formed, vaguely defined task forces. They establish complex, insurmountable barriers to accessing the granular data required to move forward.
And the executive's directive to initiate a third-party audit in Sarah's case. That is the quintessential slowdown.
Because it looks like action.
Exactly. It sends a highly visible signal to the board and the public that the institution is taking the matter with the utmost seriousness, while mathematically ensuring that no immediate disruptive action can possibly be taken.
The underlying message of the slowdown is not, we refuse to do this.
No.
The message is, we cannot possibly do this yet because we must ensure our response is perfectly optimized.
It weaponizes the concept of thoroughness against the truth.
Wild.
And when the slowdown fails to exhaust the truth teller, right, if they keep pushing, the institution escalates to the second mechanism, which is the pushback.
The pushback.
The pushback represents a tactical shift. The focus is deliberately moved away from the undeniable facts of the data and redirected toward the methodology, the tone, or the professional legitimacy of the individual presenting the data.
The institution communicates a nuanced message like, we agree that ethical sourcing is paramount, but your approach is fundamentally flawed.
Exactly. Leadership will begin to question the sample size of the report. They will raise artificial concerns about whether the appropriate internal stakeholders were adequately consulted before the data was compiled.
So in Sarah's case, the executive might gently suggest in subsequent performance reviews that as a junior analyst, she simply lacks the experience to grasp the full strategic complexity of global macroeconomic supply chain.
It is a highly insidious strategy designed to delegitimize the messenger. By framing the researcher as inexperienced, overly aggressive, or methodologically sloppy, the institution neutralizes the data without ever appearing overtly hostile to the cause.
But what if the individual survives the pushback? Like, what if they refine their methodology, consult all the stakeholders, and just persist in presenting the data?
Well, then the institution moves to a much more aggressive posture. That phase is called the shutdown.
The shutdown.
Yeah. The shutdown discards the veneer of procedural delay completely. It is an explicit, authoritative directive to cease the line of inquiry.
So they just tell you to stop.
The leadership exerts structural pressure to terminate the research. The justification provided is usually that the investigation is now deemed inappropriate or outside the scope of current strategic priorities or directly conflicting with core institutional values.
Core institutional values.
Right. The institution might explicitly state that continuing to focus heavily on the ethical failures of a specific extraction zone is mutually exclusive with maintaining the aggressive market dominance required to fund future green initiatives.
So they frame it as you're hurting the greater good by focusing on this.
Therefore, the investigation must end for the greater good of the company.
And if the individual still refuses to comply, like if Sarah decides to leak the report internally or take the data to a regulatory body.
Oh, that triggers the final punitive mechanism, the blowback.
A blowback.
The blowback is the deployment of the institution's disciplinary apparatus against the truth teller. The individual is systematically isolated and punished.
So HR gets involved.
Absolutely. They are officially labeled through human resources channels as not a team player or persistently difficult or too emotionally invested to maintain professional objectivity.
Got it. By successfully branding the researcher's passion for the truth as a psychological or professional defect, the institution fully neutralizes the threat.
Completely. The truth teller is effectively cast out, marginalized, or terminated, entirely protecting the existing power structures and profit models.
The blowback really weaponizes the individual's moral clarity against them. It creates a narrative where caring about the devastation proves that the data must be fundamentally flawed by emotional bias.
It's gaslighting in its purest form.
But, the executive's specific tactic with the third-party consultancy operates on an even deeper level than just HR management. There is a physical and linguistic architecture to this denial. It involves what sociological frameworks identify as sociospatial and sociomental denials.
Sociological denial expands the understanding of truth avoidance way beyond internal mental states. It demonstrates how denial is physically built, literally poured into concrete, and engineered into the geographical reality of our world.
So sociospatial denial, that refers to the intentional physical structuring of reality to ensure the truth remains invisible.
Exactly. In Sarah's situation, the catastrophic environmental devastation is maintained thousands of miles away from the corporate headquarters. That's the most obvious spatial separation.
Right.
But sociospatial denial also dictates the immediate built environment, the conference room itself.
The heavy soundproofing, the climate-controlled air.
Yes. And the artisanal coffee sourced from ethical growers. It is all meticulously designed to physically insulate the inhabitants. The architecture creates this hermetically sealed reality that physically prevents the executives from accidentally witnessing or even conceptually grasping the brutal consequences of their supply chain.
It's literally walling out the truth.
Exactly. The physical structure of modern globalized capitalism is engineered specifically to conceal the estrangement, exploitation, and loss it inherently produces.
The architecture literally ensures the truth remains out of sight and therefore permanently out of mind.
And complementing that physical architecture is sociomental denial.
Right, which operates through language.
Yes. It is the process of categorizing and classifying reality through shared cognitive frameworks and corporate jargon to strip the truth of its impact.
So by labeling the devastating human cost and ecological destruction as mere supply chain complexity, the horror is linguistically neutralized. The visceral reality of poisoned groundwater and forced labor is transformed into a sterile, abstract logistical challenge. The language strips the situation of all moral urgency.
The truth is hidden in plain sight, just buried under layers of acceptable vocabulary.
And by allocating funds to a consultancy to manage this newly categorized complexity, the institution perfects the outsourcing of the unbearable truth.
They are not explicitly ignoring the data.
No, they are actively managing it within a rigidly defined cognitive box. And this specific box demands no moral metamorphosis, no reduction in profit, and no structural change.
Right.
This sociomental agreement is the exact mechanism that allows Sarah and her colleagues to attend their values and vision mixers with clear consciences.
It's wild.
They operate within a culture that has collectively, silently agreed to a strict set of rules regarding what phenomena to pay attention to and what phenomena to effectively, permanently ignore.
So we've moved from the internal defenses of Elias's ego to the structural immune system of Sarah's corporation. The final scale to examine is the level of societal memory and the broader social discourse.
This brings us to Marcus.
Yes. The story of Marcus illustrates how historical truth is neutralized by the collective consciousness.
Let's set the scene for Marcus. It's a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Marcus, covered in dust, is systematically clearing out the crawl space of his meticulously restored Victorian home.
Lovely.
He resides in a highly sought-after neighborhood, one consistently lauded in real estate brochures and city planning documents for its success in reclaiming its historical heritage. But tucked away in the darkest corner of the crawl space, he unearths a tightly bound bundle of letters and documents dating back to the 1950s.
Okay.
He opens them, anticipating a discovery of quaint historical value. Instead, he finds a collection of cold, highly administrative documents. They are the minutes and correspondence of the neighborhood association from that era.
Okay.
The documents detail a systematic, meticulously organized, community-led effort to relentlessly harass and eventually firebomb the first black family that had attempted to integrate the street. Reading through the precise, bureaucratic language detailing the violence, a horrifying reality crystallizes for Marcus.
Imagine.
The forced, violent departure of this specific family was not an isolated tragedy. It was the exact foundational mechanism that ensured the racial homogeneity of the neighborhood.
Which in turn laid the groundwork for the historical preservation, exclusivity, and massive property value that Marcus currently enjoys.
For the following week, Marcus is in a state of torment. The physical environment of his home turns hostile. Every creak of the original hardwood floors sounds like a historical accusation.
His sanctuary is ruined.
His beautiful, safe sanctuary has been instantaneously transformed into a monument of theft and violence. This information acts as a highly disruptive truth.
Highly disruptive.
However, by the second week, a distinct shift occurs in Marcus's processing of the event. He does not place a for sale sign on the front lawn.
No.
He does not utilize his wealth to track down the descendants of the displaced family to initiate a reparation fund.
Okay.
Instead, he purchases archival quality folders, carefully places the documents inside, and formally donates them to a prominent local museum.
You know, Marcus's resolution provides a textbook illustration of how social discourse manages and diffuses disruptive historical knowledge. His actions highlight a critical epistemological distinction within the framework of sociology. It's the profound difference between a livable truth and a disruptive truth.
The mechanics of what Marcus accomplished really require strict scrutiny. Because on the surface, the act of donating the letters to a historical museum appears to be an act of noble transparency.
He's preserving history.
Unlike Elias, who completely destroyed the evidence, Marcus preserves it for the public record. However, this act of preservation operates as a highly sophisticated, deeply insidious form of neutralization.
How would you describe it?
The mechanism is similar to discovering a highly venomous snake coiled in the center of your bed.
Okay.
The logical response to an immediate threat is to either kill the snake or permanently abandon the house. Instead, Marcus's action is the equivalent of paying an expert to carefully remove the snake and place it inside a thick, temperature-controlled glass terrarium local zoo.
Brilliant.
The snake is now perfectly safe to observe, but it is only safe because it is trapped behind glass, permanently and utterly disconnected from the intimacy of the personal living space.
The terrarium analogy isolates the precise boundary between the livable and the disruptive. A livable truth is defined as a piece of knowledge, however unfortunate or tragic, that can be successfully integrated into an individual's life or a society's overarching narrative without demanding any fundamental structural alteration to the existing power dynamics or distribution of resources.
So it might make you sad, but it doesn't change your life.
Exactly. It may cause temporary discomfort, but it does not break the operational system.
So the letters detailing the firebombing do not qualify as a livable truth.
They absolutely do not. The letters function as an epistemological earthquake. They pose a lethal threat to the foundational narrative of Marcus's entire existence. The core narrative he relies upon is the belief that he is a fundamentally good, deserving person residing in a fair, meritocratic society.
He believes his beautiful property and his social standing are the direct, exclusive result of his own hard work and inherent virtue.
If he processes the raw, unmediated truth of those documents, that foundational assumption shatters entirely. It demands the acknowledgement that his current comfort is directly subsidized by historical terrorism.
So confronted with this psychological annihilation, he executes a sociomental magic trick to convert the disruptive truth into a livable one.
And the specific mechanism he deploys is cognitive classification and abstraction. By transferring ownership of the letters to the museum, he fundamentally alters their categorization. The moment the museum accession number is stamped on the folder, the letters cease to be a record of a personal geographical debt.
They are no longer evidence of a specific localized crime that demands personal rectification or the forfeiture of his property.
Exactly. Instead, they are abstracted into a dark chapter of broader social history.
Ow.
This abstraction strips the truth of its immediate moral demand. The violence is transformed into an artifact. It becomes an academic phenomenon to be studied by historians behind protective glass, entirely removed from the reality of Marcus's bedroom.
He successfully outsources the unbearable weight of the guilt to the institutional archive.
Yes. And the necessity of this abstraction goes way beyond Marcus's personal comfort. It is tied to the requirements of broad societal stability.
So,
Well, societal stability relies heavily on a psychological construct known as the just world hypothesis and a shared sense of justice. Citizens must maintain a baseline disposition to believe that the rules of society are generally fair and that others are operating within that same framework of fairness.
so if Marcus fully integrates the disruptive truth, if he accepts that his property rights are illegitimate and founded on unpunished violence, it severely erodes that shared sense of justice. It threatens to plunge his psychological state into a Hobbesian worldview.
And the philosopher Thomas Hobbes posited that the natural state of humanity is a war of all against all.
Right, where life is nasty, brutish, and short, and all social organization is ultimately rooted in raw power and violence rather than justice.
If Marcus accepts the truth of his foundation, the entire social contract begins to look less like a system of mutual benefit and more like a massive intergenerational cartel agreement where the beneficiaries simply agreed to stop asking questions about where the resources came from.
Terrifying.
To prevent this terrifying psychological descent, to prevent the total collapse of his belief in a rational, fair universe, Marcus is compelled to defang the disruption.
He has to.
The anxiety of living in a fundamentally unjust world where he is the direct beneficiary of an atrocity is psychologically intolerable. Therefore, he actively chooses the comfort of a livable illusion over the surgical strike on his existence.
And the museum donation is the perfect mechanism.
It allows him to publicly acknowledge the factual existence of the documents while completely, securely disavowing the meaning and the moral demand of those facts.
Synthesizing the mechanisms across these three distinct scales really reveals a terrifying uniformity. I mean, Elias destroys a career-ending email to protect his ego. The corporate executive outsources an environmental catastrophe to a bureaucratic audit to protect the institution. Marcus donates the evidence of historical terrorism to an archive to protect a societal narrative. Whether the scale is the internal mind, the multinational corporation, or the collective historical memory, the underlying operational mechanism is identical. In every instance, an entity encountered a highly acidic truth. And in every instance, the entity successfully deployed highly complex, energy-intensive mechanisms to neutralize the acid, ensuring they absolutely did not have to undergo a painful metamorphosis.
And the sheer volume of energy required to maintain this architecture of denial brings the analysis to the psychosocial depth of the phenomena. It requires examining the specific role of the unconscious and the psychoanalytic concept of disavowal.
Okay.
The critical distinction that must be made here is the vast difference between active disavowal and passive ignorance.
Right. Passive ignorance is merely the absence of data. It is the state of not knowing a specific historical date or a geographical fact simply because the information was never encountered.
Correct. Passive ignorance is a benign deficit of information. However, the coordinated denial observed in these scenarios, the elaborate dance around the black hole of truth, is not a lack of information. It is also not simply the passive avoidance of things that cause emotional displeasure. It is an incredibly energy-intensive, highly active, continuous psychosocial process.
It requires relentless, exhausting work to actively not see the black hole that is sitting right in the center of the room.
Immense, constant work. This brings the analysis to the psychoanalytic concept of disavowal, which articulates the precise paradox of knowing and not knowing.
Right.
The French psychoanalyst Octave Menoni famously summarized this state with the phrase, "I know very well, but nevertheless."
I know very well, but nevertheless. That is powerful.
It is. Elias, the corporate executive, and Marcus all exist in this exact paradoxical state. They possess the factual data.
They've seen it with their own eyes.
They have seen the email, they have read the environmental report, they hold the historical letters in their hands, they know the truth very well, yet simultaneously they actively do not know it.
It's a split reality.
They perform a surgical psychological strike to sever the facts from their meaning, their implications, and their moral demands, entirely removing the consequences from their conscious awareness.
So they possess the raw data, but they successfully murder the consequences of that data.
Yes. And the motivation driving this massive expenditure of psychological energy is a complex, unconscious mixture of desire and aggression.
Talk about the desire part.
Well, individuals and institutions actively desire the comfortable outcomes provided by the illusion. Elias deeply desires the prestigious journalism award and the intoxicating identity of the enlightened hero.
Right.
The renewable energy institution aggressively desires the massive profit margins and the pristine public relations narrative of saving the planet. Marcus deeply desires the safety, the wealth, and the aesthetic beauty of his historic neighborhood.
The prize is aggressively desired.
The prize is the ultimate goal. However, humanity absolutely refuses to acknowledge the aggression, the manipulation, the exploitation, or the historical theft that is structurally required to secure and maintain those prizes.
We want the sausage, but we don't want to see how it's made.
Exactly. To survive the cognitive dissonance of wanting the prize while abhorring the method of its acquisition, the human mind, operating within these complex social structures, systematically splits the world into acceptable and unacceptable realities.
It compartmentalizes everything.
The bad actions are projected onto distant others or relegated to the unchangeable past, while the good intentions are hoarded for the self.
Right.
This allows the individual and the institution to maintain an impenetrable illusion of absolute innocence while actively participating in or directly benefiting from massive systems of harm.
So the evidence gathered across the psychological, institutional, and social landscapes leads to an overwhelming conclusion.
It really does.
The overarching problem facing humanity is not a deficit of facts. Society is not stumbling blindly through the dark simply because it lacks the proper data points or sufficient investigative reporting.
No, we have the data.
We do. The incredibly elaborate structures of cognitive dissonance, the highly sophisticated, multi-layered strategies of institutional gaslighting, and the complex epistemological frameworks of historical abstraction. The sheer existence of this massive defensive architecture proves beyond a doubt that humanity is acutely, agonizingly aware of the exact nature of the truth.
The acid is clearly perceived. Its corrosive potential is perfectly understood.
However, the truths that society universally applauds, the truths that are championed in public discourse and commemorated on bronze plaques, are exclusively the truths that exact no cost. They're the safe, sterile truths that affirm inherent goodness, that leave existing power structures completely intact, and that allow individuals to sleep soundly in their Victorian homes.
Exactly.
When a truth reveals its acidic nature, when it demands the painful dissolution of a carefully curated self-image, when it requires a total metamorphosis of daily life and a permanent relinquishing of systemic comfort, it is no longer treated as data.
It is treated as an existential threat.
A total, coordinated war is declared against it. The ultimate tragedy of human cognition and social organization is not that the truth is somehow lost to history.
No.
It is not that it is forgotten or buried in the sands of time or hidden by a lack of transparency. The tragedy is that the truth is perfectly preserved.
It's all right there.
It is meticulously categorized, beautifully filed, and permanently securely locked inside the collective blind spots. It functions quietly, efficiently, every single day, as the very mortar that holds together the massive, comfortable illusions that society loudly claims to be fighting against. When the shutter slams shut, it is not because the observer failed to see what was outside the window. It is because they saw it with absolute terrifying clarity and realized that allowing the acid inside would leave absolutely nothing of themselves behind.